And corrupt government know this, and so they make every attempt to remove weapons from the hands of the general public. They pretend to care about the people, they pretend to be aiming for peace, when in reality they're doing nothing of the sort. So, it's all very unpleasant, this, isn't it? Just to make matters worse, such governments will willfully organise psychological operations, psyops, apparently terrible spontaneous acts of violence that outrage the unthinking common man and spark him into doing something rash or agreeing to something rash. And these fake happenings, these psyops or false flag events, have been an instrument of statecraft for every major world power for thousands of years. Make no mistake about that. And I talk about this in my book, The Unfoldment. There's a chapter that goes into this, just for those who aren't aware of it. And so do many other authors, of course, particularly over the last 30 years or so. And if you doubt this stuff and consider it to be just some crackpot conspiracy nonsense, just stop listening now and go and watch CNN and BBC and see if that makes you feel better. So, a really clever device for corrupt governments to start the ball rolling on disarmament was to establish registration. Right? Seems okay on the surface, but can very easily be used to track, identify and withdraw ownership at a moment's notice. So the Firearms Act of 1920 expanded this to include not only handguns, but all firearms except shotguns. Later laws, passed in 1953 and 1967, outlawed the carrying of any weapon by private citizens and mandated the registration of all shotguns. So by the 70s, no one really ever saw weapons in England. Few little gun clubs had them, people who were really interested and enjoyed shooting and target practice and all the rest of it. It's not in people's consciousness. Anyone under the age of 40 really isn't aware of guns in England. They don't understand it. They don't see that in the public conversation. The real acceleration of disarmament began with two figures, two people, Michael Ryan and Thomas Hamilton. In 1987, Michael Ryan, this guy, apparently walked through the English countryside and shot 16 people. And this led to the Firearms Amendment Act 1988, which banned the ownership of semi-automatic rifles and restricted the use of other firearms with a capacity of more than 2 rounds. And this is the kind of thing that is going on right now at the time of this recording in the States. They are associating mass killings with semi-automatic weapons. Back in England, 9 years after that event, in 1996, another guy, Thomas Hamilton, killed 15 school children and a teacher after walking into a school and opening fire. Shortly after, the UK government instigated a UK-wide ban on handguns. All gone. So after these two incidents, pistols, revolvers, rifles, pump-action shotguns and practically every other form of firearm you can imagine disappeared off the radar completely. And although the Tory legislation banned only handguns greater than .22 calibre, which was bad enough, the new Labour government went further with the Firearms Amendment No. 2 Act 1997 and effectively banned all handguns. Now after this Thomas Hamilton thing, they had this Dunblane inquiry, which is a shocking whitewash. Awful and very plainly deceptive. And when that Dunblane inquiry ended, the few law-abiding citizens left who owned handguns legally were given 3 months to turn them over to local authorities. Anyone who disobeyed was visited by police and threatened with a 10-year prison sentence if they didn't comply. And as I say in the essay, Hungerford was a well-controlled situation. Awareness of government duplicity was astonishingly low back in 1987. Dunblane, however, 9 years later, left a lot of loose ends. Numerous theories arose focusing on relationships between the Central Scotland Police, secret societies, George Robertson, MI6, supporters of the Snowdrop Petition and Northern Ireland terrorist organisations. Of course, nothing could be proven or substantiated. Public outrage, dead women and children, and 90 years of accelerating gun control made radical policy change easy. It was soon virtually impossible to own a handgun. Shooting clubs went out of business overnight. Some even switched to air rifles and muzzle-loading muskets in an effort to lawfully diversify and still offer something to law-abiding punters who enjoyed shooting. Even Olympic marksmen still have to leave the UK to practice and compete properly. So you get the picture of that. From an enlightened, awakened position, from a position of truth, that's a problem. Because you can't trust the government to be the only people who have the guns. Simple as that. Let us not allow that to happen in America. It must not. The government cannot be trusted. The people bear arms specifically to ensure the security of a free state, i.e. to defend against tyrannical government. My gut tells me that Sandy Hook was another in a long line of these psyops. And if you do a careful analysis of the incident, compare all the local and national media broadcasts, listen to witness reports, use your own discerning powers of critical reason, the whole event fits perfectly the profile of a psyop. Confirmed multiple shooters, pre-packaged nutty lone shooter narrative, tightly controlled media reporting, fake interviews, logistical improbabilities, the immediate labelling of serious questioning of events as disgraceful conspiracy. And you might want to check out the work of a guy called James F. Tracy, who has written about this quite sensibly in my view. Not perfect on everything, but brave, courageous. I'm not going to go into the whole thing here. It's not the time or place for it. And maybe I won't anywhere else for that matter. But I've done my own study on this, and it's pretty obvious that the official story is a fairy tale. And I think that if you do the homework yourself and go into it, which is probably about 10 days dedicated study, all day, every day. So pack that all together or do it the best way you can with your schedule. If you do that, I promise you that you will come away realising that Sandy Hook was not the result of Adam Lanza going bonkers. For me, the equation is pretty simple. Gun control equals disarmament. If anybody thinks that it is a good idea to disarm oneself right now, where we are, not where we think we are or where we'd like to be, but right now where we actually are, if anyone thinks it's a good idea to do that with just good intentions and hope, then I see a very long journey ahead for that person. I see that they are at the very smallest foothills of Mount Everest and have a mind-boggling ascent to make before any perceptions of truth are achieved. This whole thing about guns has raised a very important dynamic for me. And it could have been any issue, any discussion, any dialogue really, but it happened to be a constitutional matter, the Second Amendment bit to do with arms. Now, the unreality signal forbids a number of topics for discussion. You cannot seriously, in the corporate media, discuss the education system, deleterious religious doctrine, ethnicity, immigration, abortion, the Second Amendment, unconstitutional government practices, the myth of American innocence, and last but not least, you cannot seriously discuss state-sponsored terrorism. You're not allowed. Fake conversations are conducted with people like Piers Morgan, and occasionally excellent people will get onto that programme and do something honourable and meaningful. But by and large, it's all a big massive waste of time, and all the CNN and MSNBC stuff, all just shockingly bad. And no one escapes that. Neither The Guardian, nor Fox, nor the BBC, nor anybody, right, left, or in the middle, doesn't matter. Nobody escapes that. We all know this is going on, and we all know what the media is full of, but how ironic, who gives a shit about the Golden Globes, or some obnoxious director's rubbish new film, or a new model of smartphone? Who is dating who in the celebrity world, What sports teams are doing? What new cars are at the big convention this year, and some rapper arrested for violence, or a rock star arrested for drug abuse, shock horror, an actor caught in a toilet with his pants down. Who cares about that? What is the significance of these news items compared to the enormous crimes against the Constitution that are being thrust into the lives of the American people currently by the Obama administration? When you speak publicly, or not even publicly, just openly about these things, whether it's to one other person or thousands or millions of other people people get upset when you say things that don't fit with the image they had projected onto you. Which is weird, because most people who listen to me and read my words and realise that there are no wrong answers, because there are no belief systems to uphold, no doctrines to maintain, no laws to enforce. Everything is up for grabs, ready for deconstructing, no rules. Everything is acceptable for honest philosophical analysis, right? And yet there still seems to persist this type of individual who's developed like a peculiar skill of listening only to the bits that fit their belief systems and ignoring the rest. Now, we all do that a little bit. You'll look at 100 things and choose the 57 from that list that fit your view and maybe ignore the rest. And as you go through life, you realise that isn't the best way to do it. You should consider all of them and truthfully bring them in. And if that means you have to adapt to your view or your belief or your model of thinking, then do it. Go with what is true. And your discernment of truth is based on your spiritual attainment, in my view. So you do the best you can. But for others, it becomes a chronic habit to only take the positives that fit with their view and throw out the rest. It's a very common error, but for a certain sort of person, let us call them a spiritual idealist, it is a fatal mistake. So bizarre. They're projecting falsehood onto things that challenge them. I am completely prepared to receive new ideas and challenges to my statements, lateral, critical alternatives to whatever I say, whatever, whenever. And as my close friends know, I am very quick to go, you know what, I was totally wrong on that. Oh my God, how embarrassing. Never mind, because now I know, and it's time to move on. And nobody's really giving a shit about that except yourself. So the quicker we learn to think, God, I thought that for ages and it's complete horseshit, the quicker you get over that little weird rumble in your psyche and just think, oh well, whatever, now I know, I think I'm a wiser person now. The quicker you can build that into your learning apparatus, the better. The disease of the spiritual idealist, which is sort of characterised by new agey people a little bit, if you know what I mean. The disease of that way of doing things is that they bring in only a certain sort of energy at the expense of other energy. They focus only on the light and turn their back on darkness by inventing childish and wholly unrealistic escapist fantasies. You know, holding hands under the big rainbow bridge across the world, laying down arms, trusting the government to do a splendid job, and generally just substituting insight for hope, which is always exceedingly unwise. I can't remember word for word, but Krishnamurti once said something along the lines of, forget hope, it's a pile of shit. As I say, I don't think that's quite how he put it, but he made that point very strongly. Nobody's bothered when you fall down except you. And if somebody sees that you get things wrong, correct it and move on all the time, they very quickly cease to be interested when you make another error. Now, if you base your whole life on one argument, that's a problem. But if you base your life on truth, then making mistakes becomes a part of your daily practice. A mistake is that you had said, look, this is the shape of this thing, okay? And then as you learn more, you realise that it actually isn't. But it was the best that you knew at the time, but the shape is actually different to what you thought it was. Well, I thought it was that, but it's actually, to the best of my knowledge right now, this shape. And that shape continues to evolve. So it's extremely odd to pin your colours to just one shape and say, that is it, that's the shape, I'm not moving, I don't care what happens, that is the shape that I use to define myself. Very odd to do that. And very odd to do that for other people as well, to say that is what he is, that is what she is. That is what this musician is to me. That is what this painter is to me. And how dare they change their shape? How dare they change their character? Because I had that very clearly and nicely defined. And now they've messed it up. And that's what the spiritual idealist does. They project those images, those shapes, inaccurately, incorrectly, dishonourably onto other people.